Hey, what's up guys? Sebastian Roy here, back with another video. On today's video, I'm going to be going over email number 3 for the buyers, so continuing along with this series. And it's just going to be a screen share video where I walk the buyers through the contract to purchase here in the state of Massachusetts. Of course, if you're not here in Massachusetts, you can just go over your state's contract, but feel free to take some ideas from this video, and I hope you enjoy it.
Okay, so here's the contract to purchase real estate for the state of Massachusetts. This does have contingencies and it is a binding contract, so if you have legal advice, you should consult your attorney. So first is for the buyers. You want to put the names and the addresses of all the buyers. So whether it's just you or your spouse, or if you're doing like a partnership with business partners, friends, anyone like that, you want to make sure their names and address are on this line here. Next is the seller's owner of record. They'll have their name and their address. And then the agent working on the transaction would be myself or one of my team members. And then we would check off we're working as a buyer's agent in this case, or a seller's agent if we are selling the home. And then it is on behalf of whatever real estate brokerage is representing in the transaction. So next is the address line. So if it's 123 Main Street in Chicopee, Massachusetts, that's what you would write, and then you would put the zip code together with all buildings and improvements thereon, which is known as the premises, to which I have been introduced by, again, that's the real estate brokerage, upon the following terms and conditions. So clause number 1 is the purchase price, and here's where you would put the purchase price that you're offering to the seller for the purchase of the premises. Do as follows. Subsection 1 is a deposit to bind this offer, so this is known as an earnest money deposit, and this is just a good faith deposit basically to a seller to show them you're serious. Now, common earnest money deposits are either 1% of the purchase price of the home, or many times you'll see $1,000 as well. Subsection 2 is the additional deposit you'll put down upon execution of the purchase and sale agreement, and the purchase and sale agreement is the next step. That is a much more lengthy contract. It has, a lot more details. It's more formalized, and it's basically the final purchase contract when purchasing the property. And that gets reviewed by the attorney. So generally, if you're putting a small down payment down, say 5%, 10%, anything like that, you'll put this down upon execution of the purchase and sale agreement. So that way your down payment money will already be paid. But if you're paying cash, the full property in cash, that'll come at the day of closing. And then subsection 3 is the balance is to be paid by either a bank's check, cashier's check, treasurer's or certified check, or a wire transfer at the time of closing. It's important to know that personal checks are not accepted for real estate transactions. Now, clause number 2 is the duration of the offer. So generally, in a very competitive seller's market, we'll like to give the sellers just a short amount of time, like 24 to 48 hours max. And this just provides a little bit of urgency to the seller so they can either accept or decline your offer or make a counter offer. But you don't want to give them, say, like 72 hours, 4 or 5 days, because then that will allow a lot more offers to roll in and then, lessen the chances of you getting an offer accepted. Clause number 3 is the purchase and sale agreement. Now, as I went over earlier, this is a finalized, very formal offer. And the time period for this is about 7 to 10 days after this purchase contract is signed. And the reason we have such a time gap there is because we have to write it up, decide on all the intricacies of it, whether or not you want to include anything, any of your contingencies. And then we have to have the attorneys review it before we submit it to the seller. Number 4 is the closing. Basically, it says that the seller agrees to meet their requirements by this date. So usually it's about 30 to 45 days, sometimes 60 or longer, depending on the parties, whatever they determine. But standard is about 45 to 60 days after the purchase contract here is signed. So you would put that date in there, and then it's recorded at whatever county registry of deeds the property is in. So if it's Hampden County, you would put Hampden County. If it's Essex County, you'd put Essex County, and so on. Number 5 is the escrow instructions. So this basically says that the deposit shall be held by the escrow agent, which here in Massachusetts, we're an attorney state, so we can have the escrow money be held by 2 parties. It could either be the attorney, which we like to do because it just simplifies the process, or we can hold it with the real estate brokerage. They can hold it in an escrow account. And the escrow agent is a third party that has no interest in the property, but they're just making sure that the funds are being taken care of, they're being dispersed to the proper parties at the right times. Number 6 is the contingencies. Now this part's very important because these are basically your outs, your ability to back out of the contract. So part A is the mortgage contingency. Now this only applies if you're financing the property, but it's very, very important, and we highly suggest you do not waive this clause, because this gives you a way to back out if for whatever reason you're unable to obtain financing. So say, unfortunately, if you were to get laid off or you lost your job within 2-3 weeks before closing, maybe even the day before closing, the lender is going to pull your pay history to make sure that you are in fact still working for the same employer, earning the same wages, to make sure that you can afford the home. But for whatever reason, if you are unable to get financing from the lender, you would be able to back out in this instance. Whereas if you waive the mortgage contingency, or if you were paying cash and you did not have this contingency, you would not be able to back out of the transaction without losing your deposit. Clause B is the inspection contingency. Again, we highly recommend you do not waive this because it gives you an easy out if you decide to back out. So some things that come up in an inspection are unable to be seen, at first sight. Sometimes they're hidden. Maybe, it's a crack in the foundation that you didn't see the first time. Maybe there's a leaky roof, or you can even back out if you didn't like the paint color on the walls. You would just say you're not satisfied with the results in the inspection. So this just gives you another ability to back out of the contract. Now, part 7 is representations and acknowledgments. And again, read this over carefully because it says that the buyer acknowledges receipt of an agency disclosure, the lead paint disclosure, and the home inspection facts for consumer brochure, which are all forms that we, the agents, are required to give the consumers before they enter into a contract. So you should have already gotten those, and this is acknowledging that you did receive them. Another thing that's very important that it states is that the buyer is not relying upon any representation, verbal or written, from any real estate broker or licensee concerning legal use. So we're required to disclose any known facts about the property, but any information that's unknown or legal advice we're not able to give, and you should not be relying on us for that information. That's why you hire these third-party services, and because you're the buyer, you're ultimately responsible for doing your due diligence. So just know that. Number 8 is the buyer's default. So if the buyer defaults on any of the buyer's obligations, all the money is then tendered as a deposit, shall be paid to the seller as liquidated damages, and this shall be the seller's sole remedy. So basically what that means is if you fail to do any of your obligations outlined in this contract, for instance, meet deadlines, then the seller would be able to keep your deposit. But me and my team will be working very closely to make sure that all of the deadlines are being met, everything's working as smoothly as possible. And number 9 is any additional terms. So this is where you would add any additional contingencies. One common contingency is if you had a home to sell, you would put that in there. And then if you had any appliances you wanted to stay with the property, so we like to include any appliances that are listed in the property listing, which common is the fridge, the microwave, the oven, the dishwasher. You can also put any furniture that you want the sellers to leave behind, whether it's included in the purchase price or it's a separate transaction. Anything that is not outlined above, we would add that in the additional terms. And then the buyer signs and dates it, and then you have the seller's reply. So they can either accept the offer on a certain date and time, or they can reject the offer, or C is they can reject the offer and make a counter offer on the following terms. And then they have the expiration date of the counter offer, and the seller signs and dates. And then if there's a counter offer from the seller, the buyer can either reply by accepting the counter offer on this date and time, or they can reject the counter offer. And then the buyer signs and dates. And then lastly is the receipt for deposit. So this is just the escrow agent's signature that they acknowledge they received the deposit and the amount of whatever your deposit is from you, the buyer, on this date.
Alright, so that wraps up the purchase contract. Again, that was just a quick overview, so don't get too overwhelmed at this point. We're going to be going over it in much more detail when the time comes. I just want to get ahead of the ball here and give you guys the contract right now so you can kind of start familiarizing yourself with it. If you have any questions at this point, don't hesitate to reach out. Stay tuned for more emails coming your way, and I appreciate you, and let's move forward.